Chapter 48. I grab the remote and turn the volume way up. A second after I do, the camera cuts to a shot of Channel 5's news team studio and then swoops in on the team's lead anchor, a lady named Cindy. She looks about as serious as I've ever seen her, and I'm so scared to hear what she has to say, I nearly change the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, robots, plural. If you've been following Channel 5's continuing coverage of today's bizarre events, you already know about the incident at the farmer's market, where witnesses claim a robotic assailant absconded with several $100s worth of local produce. Now we're getting reports of a second incident, this one outside of the Flower Power Bakery. According to witnesses, there were multiple robotic assailants involved in this incident. The Channel 5's news team is advising local residents to stay inside, lock your doors, and, most of all, keep your television tuned to Channel 5 for ongoing coverage of this story. And now, Cindy says, straightening a stack of papers on her desk, back to John Castle in the field. The camera cuts to a shot of a bakery. I know the place. It's maybe half a mile away from the parking lot where the farmer's market is held every weekend. There's a scuffling sound off screen, and then John Castle stumbles into the shot. He's pale, as colorless as a marshmallow, and he keeps peering up and down the street, spinning suddenly to see who or what might be behind him. After a second, a lady appears. She plucks the microphone out of John Castle's hand, then brings it way too close to her mouth. "Name's Rhonda," she said, "and I see 'em. 2 of 'em, maybe 3. Now that I'm thinking about it, big guys though, all gray, hungry, angry, claws like—" She lifts her free hand and twists the fingers this way and that. Kinda like, and then they were doing this thing too, this thing. Rhonda suddenly drops into a crouch and pokes her butt way out behind her, and then into the microphone she makes a bunch of laser-like sound effects. Pew, 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 bam! The noises frighten John Castle, who takes off running down the street. A beat later, we're back in the studio with Cindy. Her face is grave, her voice sincere. "Yes, folks," she says. "You heard it here on Channel 5 first. It seems as though these robots are capable of shooting lasers out of their rear ends." Chapter 49. Dan leaps up from the couch and rushes into the kitchen. Honestly, I would have been too surprised if he didn't stop running until he reached the West Coast, or at least made it to Texas. But he comes back just a couple seconds later with a sheet of blank paper and a mechanical pencil in his hand. He plops himself down in front of the coffee table and thumbs the eraser of the pencil to get it back a bit of the lead. Then he starts to sketch. First, he makes a series of close-together parallel lines, and below and above them a bunch of rectangles and squares. I realize what it is just as the others do. "Streets and buildings?" says John Henry Knox, right as Jerry says, "A map." Dan keeps drawing. All the way over on the left side of the paper, he makes a large square. The right in the center of it, he writes FM. Then, in a small rectangle toward the paper's middle, he writes B. And finally, in a shape so big only a fraction of it fits on the right side of the paper, he writes S and S. And then draws a familiar little logo, a cartoon apple and a smiling orange slice. It's only then that I get just what Dan's map is of, the part of the town that the robots, or at least some of them, are in. And the reason why they're there is obvious. You can see it as soon as you look at the paper, but just in case the day's events have totally fried my or Jerry's or John Henry Knox's brain, Dan draws an arrow. It's perfectly straight, and it runs directly from the farmer's market, past the bakery, to the shop and safe. "They can see the fruit," Dan says, dragging the tip of the pencil around and around the grocery store's logo, circling the thing until the happy little fruits are trapped in the center of the giant target. "They recognize it. It looks like a picture in their memory banks, and they're heading right for it." Looking down at Dan's map, I realize it's all over. I don't know what the other guys are thinking, but I know there's nothing we can possibly do. We have to call the cops. Call them and tell them everything we know and do our best to make sure they actually believe us, because only then will they call up the Army and the Air Force, who I'm thinking they just might need in order to put a stop to things. Slowly, Dan and Jerry and John Henry Knox and I all look up from the map. Guys, I tell them, I think that's as far as I get, because that's when it hits me. And it hits me like a freight train. Like a freight train barreling downhill and being pulled by a squadron of sound barrier breaking, sonic boom making Air Force grade jet planes. I'm thinking about that food cube Dan put in my bathtub and how it basically exploded when he threw a little water on it. I'm thinking about that and about a dozen other things, like last summer and Dan's brother and General Noodles, just to name a few. And then I'm pointing to Dan's map, to the parallel lines that run alongside the Shop and Save. I can see a place in my head. It's a narrow alleyway lined with dumpsters and piles of broken down cardboard boxes. This is the back of the store, right? I ask. Dan nods. All these streets over here? I say, waving my fingertip around the lines between the bakery and the grocery store. They're all residential, yeah? Yep, Jerry says. He points to a spot on the map. My cousin lives right there. And so, I go on, if people do what they've been told and stay in their houses, the robots, they shouldn't meet anybody on their way to the Shop and Save. And before they get into the Shop and Save, they have to make it all the way down the alleyway. Right? All of it's right, says John Henry Knox, trying to hurry me along. What are you getting at? I look at John Henry Knox and Jerry and ask them a simple, single question. Have you guys ever worked with chopsticks? Beside them, Dan's face lights up. So does mine. Chapter 50. First thing I do is run up to my closet. I dig out all the pairs of chopsticks I've gathered from years and years of ordering from General Noodles. There's no time to count, but if I had to guess, I'd say I've got hundreds, if not 1,000, of the thin little strips of wood. I stuff as many of them as I can into my old backpack, then grab 2 of the shoe boxes that live on my bookshelf. One of them is labeled rubber bands. The other one is labeled balloons. Back downstairs, before I even get a chance to put the backpack down, Dan grabs a handful of the chopsticks out of it. Then he takes a seat and shows Jerry and John Henry Knox step by step how to build a catapult, using the same design we put to work last summer on Dan's older brother. Within 60 seconds, both guys get it. They're engineers, after all, and wave Dan off so they can start constructing their own. I'm hesitant to interrupt, but I do just so to let them know that if they've got the catapults covered, I'm going to go fill up the balloons and gather as many jugs and bottles of water as I can find. A second later, I'm darting toward the kitchen. Before I can get into the kitchen, though, Dan calls out to me, "Wait!" I spin around in time to see the smile spread across his face. "This is going to work," he tells me. I stand there long enough to flash him a smile back, and then I'm on my way again. But my smile doesn't last. It's gone before I even get to the sink, because I'm not feeling quite as confident as Dan seems to be. Filling up one balloon after another, I hope, as hard as I can hope, that this plan I just cooked up really does work. Chapter 51. 19 minutes. That's how long it takes. 19 minutes for me to make a ton of water balloons and gather up as many jugs and bottles of water as I can find. 19 minutes for Dan and Jerry and John Henry Knox to construct enough catapults for us to launch a serious attack on a horde of hungry robots. 19 minutes, and then another 1 or 2 for us to carefully pack it all up and get out the door. And then we're off. We're on our way to Shop and Save, moving as fast as 4 not-so-athletic kids carrying a couple dozen gallons of water and a handful of super fragile chopstick and rubber band catapults can. Chapter 52. Luckily, we don't run into any robots on the way to the grocery store. That, of course, Could be for any number of reasons, some good, some bad, and others downright ugly. I point Dan and John Henry Knox toward the alleyway in back of the store. Go set up, I tell them. I'll be right there. Then I grab Jerry and give him some directions. First, I tell him, he needs to do a full sweep of the store. Once he's sure there are no robots inside, he's to come back out and do a loop of the place's perimeter. He's the fastest one of the four of us, a fact he made plain on the journey down to the store. Meet us out back as soon as you're done, I tell him, giving him his shoulder slap of encouragement. Jerry gives me a thumbs up and hurries off. I book it to the back of the store where Dan and John Henry Knox have already set up and positioned several catapults. I get out the one I'm carrying and set it up too. Then we form an assembly line and quickly pile up 40 water balloons, a little more than half of the total number we've got. What now? Dan says. Now? I say to him and John Henry Knox. Now we wait. Chapter 53. And so we wait. But not for long. 2, maybe 3 minutes later, we see a bright spot of light just past the narrow gap in the cement barriers that separate the nearby dead-end street from the alleyway. The spot of light is spiked and twinkling like a star that fell from the sky and touched down right here in back of the grocery store, which obviously couldn't happen. It's a robot. Its body made of highly reflective metal. But it looks like a star. And the longer I stand there waiting, the more it feels like it too. Like the sun itself came down from its perch up in the center of our solar system and set up shop just 100 feet from me for the sole purpose of sucking all the moisture out of my body. I'm sweating. Standing in the alleyway behind the shop and save with a fat red water balloon in my hand, a chopstick catapult locked back and ready to be loaded at my feet, and the safety of a whole town depending on whether I and 3 other 12-year-olds can pull this off. I'm sweating like I've never sweat in my life. The robot slips through the gap and into the alley, and my heart does a crazy little dance. The robot steps into the shadow cast by the back of the grocery store, its twinkling brilliance disappearing all at once, and my lungs lose their rhythm. The robot may or may not know we're here. I can't tell for sure. It's got its big square head tipped all the way back, its plastic eyes aimed up at the giant shop and save sign perched over our heads. 70 feet, 65, now 60. The water balloon John Henry Knox has in his hand suddenly bursts. I look over long enough to see that the guy's in even worse shape than I am. He's not only gushing sweat by the gallon, but he's shaking too, shivering like he's got some kind of fever. 40 feet. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Dan hand John Henry Knox a new water balloon. 35 feet. Now 30. In a second, as long as it doesn't stop or change directions, the robot will be in range of our catapults. 25 feet. Dan gets down on one knee. He holds a green water balloon right above the hand of the catapult's long, strong, ready-to-snap arm. From here, it'll take him no more than half a second to place the balloon, take aim, and launch the thing at the robot. 20 feet. 18. Make the call, Dan tells me. Just say when. 16 feet. 14. 12. Ken! It's Dan again, sounding slightly worried because he probably should have launched the balloon by now. 10 feet. Okay, he definitely should have launched the balloon by now. But I can't give the command. I just noticed something. The robot, it's got a strand of duct tape dangling from each of its wrists, trailing down from both ankles. There's half a bike lock dangling down over its chest like some kind of weird necklace. 8 feet. Grieg? The robot stops. His big square head swivels on his tiny neck. He looks down from the shop and save sign. He looks down at me. His eyes flash red. He says, "Good morning, sunshine." Chapter 54. Grieg stays where he is, 8 feet away. I take a step forward and make it 7 feet. Then another. 6. Behind me, Dan says, "Ken?" And then, when I don't answer him, "Ken!" But Grieg starts up before I can answer Dan. Sunshine, the robot says. Please feed, please. Come as Dibbles, please. Get away from him, Dan tells me. Get away from him now. You're an obstacle to him, Ken. That's it. That's all. I am Grieg, says Grieg, as if defending himself against Dan's claims. Please feed Grieg, sunshine. Run, Ken. Run now. Sunshine. Remember good times had at location 29392222229. Don't listen to him, Ken. Feeding. Back away. Digesting. Come on, Ken. Disposal. Please, Dan says. And then there's silence. Grieg's said his piece. Dan's said his. Now it's up to me. Here, I say, holding out my hand. Grieg reaches for the water balloon. I tug it back just before one of his finger claws pops the thing. No, I say. Open up. And the universe holds its breath. But nothing happens. Until it does. With a creak, the little door in Grieg's torso swings open. I peer into the robot's stomach and look for a safe place to set the water balloon. Because it's crowded in there, Grieg's been eating. I see a paper cup from Burger Zone, a few used napkins, several rock-hard wads of already chewed gum, and 3 rotting oranges. I don't see any of those brown-black cubes, but I know there's got to be a few of them in there somewhere, and all I can do is hope that a nice big drink of water will make those bad boys burst. I set the balloon atop the Burger Zone cup. It fits snugly, but not too snugly. I pull my hand back and say, see how it tastes. Grieg shuts the door to his guts and then presses the tiny button beside it. There's a loud sound. It's churning and crunching. Behind me, Dan says, okay, now you really need to run. Chapter 55. Dan and John Henry Knox are already on the move by the time I turn around and start running. I don't make it too far before it happens, it being the explosion, but far enough so that the blast leaves me relatively unharmed. Blast, though, isn't really the right word. It's more of a squapoom, a massive squelch cut off prematurely by a pop-boom sort of thing. But no matter what you call it, one thing's for sure, it's powerful. It knocks me off my feet. It feels like a giant hand just scoops me up and flings me down the alleyway. I hit the ground and slide a few feet across the pavement, shredding up my elbows and knees. But I managed to get my hands over my head just in time to keep any flying parts, nuts and bolts and hunks of busted apart metal, and less threateningly, rice cakes and deli meat and a bunch of overripe bananas from cracking my skull. Once I'm sure the robot pieces are done falling out of the sky, I uncover my head and look around. Dan's already on his feet. John Henry Knox is halfway there. Dan comes over and offers me a hand. He pulls me up and then looks me over, making sure I'm all right, which I am. A bit banged and bloodied up, but all things considered, I'm okay. Dan is too, and while John Henry Knox might have taken a couple of bolts to the back, he looks fine. Maybe even a little bit excited. That's when he giggles, a sound I never even knew the kid was capable of making. I want to try, he says. Well, Dan tells him, jerking his chin toward the end of the alleyway, I'm sure you're going to get a chance. I look, and through the haze of smoke hanging over the heap of metal that had once been Grieg, I see 3 more robots slipping through the cement barriers and into the alleyway. Chapter 56. We dart back to the catapults and quickly check to make sure they're still okay. One of them is definitely unusable. It got crushed by a big hunk of robot head and a container of cold ravioli, but the others are fine. I go to grab us some water balloons, but instead of finding a pile of the things, I find a mess of stringy, wet plastic. Obviously, I realize. The fragile balloons were no match for the storm of shrapnel that blew through the alleyway. Catch! I look up and Dan lobs a brand new water balloon my way. By the time I catch the thing, he's already begun to prepare another. Ready? That would be John Henry Knox. He's down, knees on the pavement, right beside me. He's using one hand to press down the arm of the catapult, the other one he's holding up to me. I set the water balloon in his palm. He gets it loaded. Say the word, he tells me. I check on the robots. The one in front has made it just a few feet into the alleyway. The other two seem to have gotten jammed up at the entrance. Wait for it, I say. The robot, already in the alleyway, tips its head back to take in the shop and save sign. With its flashing eyes fastened to the thing, it picks up speed. It starts moving way faster than I ever saw Greed go. Whoa, 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 I say. And then, hoping that I'm judging this right, fire! John Henry Knox releases the catapult and sends the balloon rocketing through the air. It sails beautifully and then sails beautifully some more. It goes right over the approaching robot's head, landing much closer to the other two robots who are still stuck at the barriers. But Dan's on it. He's already crouched down over a catapult, loading and aiming a fat blue balloon. He lets it fly and sends the balloon splattering directly into the approaching robot's chest. Only this doesn't stop the thing. There's no squaboom. The soaking wet robot keeps rushing our way. What? I say. Just wait, John Henry Knox tells me. It'll take a little longer, but the water will get in there. It should. There's a zap. A single loud The robot charging our way suddenly changes direction. It takes a sharp right and smashes full speed into the side of the shop and save. Its bulky square head pops off its tiny neck as if it's on a spring. The rest of the robot crumbles into a heap against the wall. The debris gives a few more smaller zaps, and then a grand finale, a series of squabooms. They're nowhere near as epic as Grieg's, but it still makes for a pretty satisfying sight. Dan, though, doesn't even bother watching. Instead, he fetches a few more balloons. He hands one to me and one to John Henry Knox, and hangs onto one for himself. Shall we? He says. Eyes aimed toward the narrow entrance of the alleyway, where those other two robots have somehow managed to get their limbs tangled together. We all take a knee, load our catapults, and fire. John Henry Knox nails one of the robots in the shoulder. Dan gets the other one in the back. A second later, mine smacks right into the robot's knotted legs. The zapping begins instantly, and shortly after, the skabooms. But there's no time to relax. Not far behind the new pile of busted-apart robots, there's another pair. Behind them, just now coming into sight, a pack of 4 more.